The wedding venue fell silent as the best man unfolded a yellow parchment that fell from the groom's grandfather's old military jacket. Words written in German revealed the bride's beloved grandfather had been an SS doctor who performed experiments on living children. The blood drained from the bride's face as her perfect day transformed into an inescapable nightmare. The document appeared weathered, its edges frayed from decades of concealment, yet the typed text remained clear enough to read. As the best man stood frozen at the microphone, the bride's family erupted in protest. Her father lunged forward, attempting to snatch the paper while shouting that it was all a terrible mistake. The groom's family sat in stunned silence, their champagne glasses suspended mid-air as the revelation echoed through the elegantly decorated hall. Dr. Richard Montgomery, a respected historian specializing in World War II documentation and authentication at Cambridge University, was among the wedding guests. He had been invited as a cousin of the groom, and initially thought the commotion was some sort of ill-conceived wedding prank. But when the paper was thrust into his hands amidst the chaos, his professional instincts immediately recognized the authenticity of what he held. The document bore all the hallmarks of genuine SS administrative documentation, Dr. Montgomery would later testify. The typeface, the quality of the paper, the official stamps, they were consistent with Reich documentation I had examined in archives. His hands trembled as he translated the German text, revealing a personnel transfer record for one Dr. Klaus Brenner from Auschwitz to Buchenwald in 1944, with specific mention of his valuable research contributions to something called Project Kindergarten. What happened next would forever be etched into the memories of everyone present. The elderly man seated at the bride's family table, the gentle grandfather who had moments earlier dabbed tears from his eyes during the ceremony, clutched at his chest and collapsed. As wedding guests rushed to his aid, his wife of 53 years began screaming not for help, but words that chilled the blood of everyone within earshot. "They found you, Klaus! They finally found you!" The grandfather's condition deteriorated rapidly as the ambulance was called. In those chaotic moments before medical help arrived, something even more disturbing occurred. The old man, previously speaking with an American accent throughout the wedding festivities, began muttering in perfect German, reciting what sounded like medical protocols and dosage calculations. The bride, a medical student herself, would later recall recognizing terms related to hypothermia treatment and human tolerance thresholds, the very subjects of infamous Nazi medical experiments. The wedding reception dissolved into chaos. Guests divided into shocked clusters, while the bride collapsed into her mother's arms, her white gown pooling around her like spilled milk. What should have been the happiest day of her life had transformed into an unthinkable revelation. Her beloved grandfather, the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had inspired her pursuit of medicine, who had walked her down the aisle alongside her father, was potentially one of history's most reviled figures, a Nazi doctor who had experimented on children. But the story that began unfolding that spring afternoon in Massachusetts would prove far more complex and disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The ambulance arrived within 13 minutes, but Klaus Brenner, or William Burton as he had been known in America since 1951, was pronounced dead on arrival at Massachusetts General Hospital. The official cause was listed as cardiac arrest, but what happened during the autopsy would send ripples through the medical examiner's office and eventually to the highest levels of government. Dr. Eleanor Petrovich, the medical examiner assigned to the case, had performed thousands of autopsies throughout her 27-year career. Nothing had prepared her for what she discovered when examining the body of the 89-year-old man on her table. During routine examination, she noticed peculiar scarring patterns on his forearms that initially appeared to be burn marks. However, closer inspection revealed something impossible. Beneath the first layer of skin was what appeared to be a second, completely different fingerprint pattern. In my professional opinion, this individual had undergone extensive physical modification, Dr. Petrovich would later state in a sealed deposition. The fingerprints visible on the surface were essentially a fabricated layer covering another distinct set of prints underneath. I had never encountered anything like it. When the FBI was called in to investigate the potential discovery of a Nazi war criminal on American soil, they made an even more baffling discovery. The fingerprints beneath the artificial layer matched no known SS officer named Klaus Brenner. In fact, they matched no records at all, in any database from any country. Meanwhile, the wedding document that had started the catastrophic chain of events was being analyzed by experts at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. Their preliminary analysis confirmed what Dr. Montgomery had initially suspected. The document was authentic Reich paperwork. However, when they cross-referenced the names and details with their extensive archives, they encountered a disturbing anomaly. There was indeed a record of an SS doctor named Klaus Brenner, but according to official documentation, he had been executed by Allied forces in 1946 after the Nuremberg trials. How could a man who had supposedly been dead for over 70 years have been living as William Burton in suburban Massachusetts? And if William Burton wasn't Klaus Brenner, then who exactly had the bride's family welcomed into their lives for over 5 decades? The bride and her family were devastated, refusing to believe the allegations against the man they had known and loved. "My father survived the Holocaust," the bride's mother insisted through tears during FBI questioning. "He had a tattoo from the camps that he kept covered. He never wanted to talk about those years. We respected that. He was a victim, not a perpetrator." Indeed, William Burton had a faded concentration camp number tattooed on his left forearm, a detail that had initially seemed to support the family's claim that he had been a victim rather than an oppressor. However, when forensic analysts examined photographs of the tattoo, they discovered something that defied explanation. Under specialized lighting, the tattoo revealed microscopic text beneath the numbers, text that included the phrase Project Lazarus and a date, October 12, 1967, 22 years after the war had ended. The groom's family was equally shattered by the events. The grandfather's jacket from which the document had fallen belonged to the groom's late grandfather, a decorated American soldier who had helped liberate Dachau. How this damning document had found its way into his possession remained a mystery. Even more disturbing, when investigators searched the attic of the groom's family home where the jacket had been stored, they discovered a hidden compartment containing additional documents, all referring to something called Operation Paperclip Variant. For those unfamiliar with history, Operation Paperclip was the covert program through which the United States government recruited German scientists after World War II, providing them with new identities to work on American military and space programs. However, no official record of any variant program existed in declassified documents. As the investigation intensified, federal agents discovered something that sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. William Burton's medical license had been granted under unusual circumstances in 1952. The licensing board had received a letter of recommendation from a doctor whose signature matched that of a high-ranking CIA official involved in a classified program called MK Ultra, the controversial mind control experiments conducted during the Cold War. The wedding guests who had witnessed the event were asked to sign non-disclosure agreements, citing national security concerns. Most complied, though some would later break their silence, contributing to the swirl of theories and speculation that would surround the case. 3 days after the wedding, the bride received an anonymous package at her apartment. Inside was a journal allegedly written by her grandfather with entries dating from 1967 to 1972. If authentic, the contents suggested something far more sinister than Nazi war crimes. They detailed experimental procedures conducted not in German concentration camps, but in American facilities, with the full knowledge and support of certain government elements. The journal described experiments focusing on something called generational memory transference, attempts to implant memories from one individual into another, creating what the writer referred to as legacy assets. More disturbing were passages suggesting that children had been subjects in these experiments, with the stated goal of creating intelligence operatives who could carry the experiential knowledge of veteran agents without requiring decades of training. When the bride turned the journal over to federal investigators, it disappeared into classified channels. She was told the document was inconsistent with historical facts and likely a sophisticated forgery intended to spread disinformation. Yet within 2 weeks, 3 former government scientists who had worked on classified projects during the Cold War died under questionable circumstances, 2 in apparent suicides and 1 in a single-vehicle accident on an empty road. The groom's grandfather, the American soldier whose jacket had contained the damning document, had been stationed in Berlin immediately after the war as part of the denazification efforts. According to military records, he had been briefly assigned to a unit responsible for tracking down escaped Nazi scientists and doctors. His personal journals from that period, which the family provided to investigators, contained troubling entries about American interests overriding justice and references to devils making deals with devils. 6 weeks after the wedding incident, the bride's grandmother, who had screamed those damning words as her husband collapsed, was found dead in her home. The official cause was listed as suicide by overdose, but the handwritten note found beside her body raised more questions than it answered. "He wasn't Klaus," it read. "Neither of us were who you think. God forgive what we allowed to happen to those children. We thought we were saving the world." The note was signed not with her known name, but as Subject Hera, Project Lazarus. When investigators searched the grandmother's personal effects, they discovered a hidden compartment in an antique jewelry box containing several vintage photographs. One showed a much younger version of William Burton in what appeared to be a laboratory setting, standing alongside several men whose faces had been carefully cut out of the image. The back of the photograph bore a single sentence written in faded ink. "The American iteration begins today, March 3, 1967. DNA analysis of tissue samples from William Burton's body revealed another impossible finding. According to the classified report, later leaked to journalists, his genetic structure showed signs of artificial modification that would have been technologically impossible in the 1940s or even 60s. The specific modifications involved telomere structures that influence aging, modifications that leading geneticists claimed were beyond current scientific capabilities even today. Whatever was done to this man's genetic structure, one anonymous scientist was quoted as saying, "It's at least 30 years ahead of where our public science is now. Either this is an elaborate hoax or someone has technology they've been keeping very, very quiet." By this point, the original wedding document that had triggered the investigation had been removed from public record, classified under national security protocols. Attempts by journalists to obtain copies through Freedom of Information Act requests were denied, with government representatives eventually claiming the document had never existed at all. The bride and groom, whose perfect day had been shattered by these revelations, attempted to rebuild their lives away from the spotlight. They canceled their honeymoon and relocated to Canada, changing their names and cutting contact with many friends and family members. However, according to sources close to the couple, they lived in constant fear, convinced they were under surveillance. 9 months after the wedding, the bride made a disturbing discovery. While organizing her late grandfather's medical books, she found a notebook hidden within the hollowed-out center of a medical text. The contents detailed what appeared to be memory implantation procedures performed on children born to women who had themselves been subjects in government experiments. More disturbing were indications that these procedures continued well into the 1980s, with subjects now potentially living as adults with artificially constructed memory sets. The notebook contained a list of 23 names, individuals allegedly carrying implanted memories designed to activate under specific circumstances. The bride's name was 20th on the list, with an activation date set for her wedding day. When she attempted to contact federal investigators with this information, she found herself instead speaking with individuals who claimed to be from a Defense Department Special Projects Division. They insisted on taking possession of the notebook, citing national security concerns. When she refused, her apartment was broken into the following night, though nothing appeared to have been taken. Fearing for her safety, she digitized the notebook's contents and sent encrypted copies to several trusted individuals, including Dr. Shu. Montgomery, the historian who had first authenticated the wedding document. 3 days later, Dr. Montgomery was detained while attempting to board a flight to Geneva, where he had planned to meet with human rights attorneys. His current whereabouts remain unknown, though university officials have been told he is on an extended research sabbatical. During this same period, historians and archivists working with Holocaust records reported unusual access restrictions being placed on previously available materials related to Nazi medical experiments and Operation Paperclip. The official explanation cited digitization efforts requiring temporary removal, but insiders claimed that specific documents were permanently redacted or altered. The bride, increasingly paranoid and desperate for answers, used her medical school connections to have a sample of her own blood tested by a trusted laboratory technician. The results showed anomalies similar to those found in her grandfather's genetic structure, specifically modifications to the telomere regions that would be consistent with genetic engineering far beyond current public capabilities. 18 months after the wedding, a fire destroyed the laboratory where these tests had been conducted. The technician who had performed the analysis was among the 3 fatalities. Authorities ruled the cause as an equipment malfunction leading to a gas leak explosion. By this point, most of the wedding guests who had witnessed the initial incident had either recanted their stories or refused to discuss the matter altogether. Several mentioned being visited by government officials who strongly suggested they had misremembered events due to the emotional nature of the wedding and the consumption of alcohol. The bride's mother, who had initially defended her father as a Holocaust survivor, changed her statement after several interviews with federal investigators. "I may have been confused about his past," she stated in a recorded interview. "My father was very private about his early life. Perhaps I constructed a narrative that made sense to me." 2 weeks after this interview, she checked into a psychiatric facility, citing recurring nightmares and paranoid delusions. The groom eventually filed for divorce and returned to the United States, taking a position with a defense contractor working on classified projects. When contacted by independent researchers investigating the case, he denied any knowledge of unusual events at his wedding, insisting that his grandfather-in-law had simply suffered a heart attack and that no documents of any kind had been discovered. In a strange twist, genealogical research into William Burton's past revealed another anomaly. Records showed he had arrived in the United States in 1951 as a refugee, with documentation supporting his identity going back to his supposed birth in Austria in 1926. However, when researchers tracked down individuals who had been processed at the same refugee center during that period, they discovered something impossible. Photographs showing William Burton appearing exactly as he had in the 1950s, in images allegedly taken in 1928 and 1936. He hadn't aged. 4 independent photographic experts confirmed these images showed no signs of manipulation and appeared authentic for their time periods. If genuine, they suggested William Burton had somehow remained physically unchanged over a span of decades when he should have aged from youth to middle age. The bride eventually disappeared entirely from public record. Her final communication was a letter sent to a journalist who had been investigating the case, containing only a cryptic message. "The children were not the experiments. They were the templates. We are not who we think we are. None of us are. Look at the vaccination records from 1967 to 1972. That's how they did it. That's how they put us all to sleep." No record of her has surfaced since. 3 years after the wedding incident, a retired CIA archivist came forward with what he claimed was a partial document related to Project Lazarus. According to this individual, the project had not been about extending the lives of Nazi scientists or creating legacy assets, but rather something far more disturbing: the systematic implantation of false memories into selected individuals to conceal what he called reality ruptures. They weren't trying to preserve Nazi knowledge, the archivist stated in an interview before his sudden death from an apparent stroke. They were trying to patch holes in our collective memory. After something happened, something so catastrophic that they decided selective amnesia was preferable to mass panic. When pressed on what this event might have been, he responded cryptically, "Why do you think we all share so many common nightmares? Why do children all fear the same monsters? What if those aren't evolutionary responses? What if they're echoes of something we've been made to forget?" The investigation stalled completely when key evidence, including William Burton's body, was destroyed in an unexplained fire at the medical storage facility where it had been kept pending further testing. Official records were amended to state that routine testing had been completed, showing nothing unusual, before the unfortunate accident occurred. Today, mention of the wedding document incident is largely dismissed as an internet conspiracy theory. Government officials deny any knowledge of Projects Kindergarten or Lazarus, and Operation Paperclip is acknowledged only in its officially documented form. Attempts to locate individuals connected to the case, including the bride, her mother, and Dr. Montgomery, have been unsuccessful. Yet rumors persist in certain circles. Defense Department whistleblowers occasionally reference generational assets deployed throughout the civilian population. Medical researchers report unexplained interference when investigating certain aspects of genetic memory. And Holocaust archives continue to show unexplained gaps in their records related to specific Nazi doctors and their American counterparts. Perhaps most disturbing are the occasional reports from wedding venues across the country. Incidents where elderly guests have suffered medical episodes after unexpected revelations, only for all evidence to disappear and witnesses to suddenly correct their memories of events. The truth about William Burton, whether he was a Nazi doctor, an American experimental subject, or something else entirely, remains buried beneath layers of classified information and active suppression. The document that fell from an old military jacket at a wedding continues to be denied by official sources, even as its contents allegedly spread through encrypted channels online. What terrible knowledge might be hidden in our collective past? What experiments continue in the shadows of government programs? And could you yourself be carrying memories that were never truly yours, implanted to conceal truths too terrible to acknowledge? If you've ever experienced moments where reality seems to briefly slip, where you recall events differently than everyone around you insists they occurred, perhaps you too are experiencing the fading effects of memory manipulation designed decades ago. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on this disturbing case. Have you ever encountered documents or evidence that seemed to vanish once authorities became involved? Share your experiences before this video itself becomes another piece of evidence that mysteriously disappears from record. And subscribe to our channel for more investigations into the darkest corners of suppressed history, the truths they don't want you to remember, the secrets buried beneath altered memories and classified files. Because the most frightening possibility isn't that monsters exist, it's that we've been programmed not to see them standing right beside us.